In 2022, a shocking discovery was found inside of a Polish forest, and it invoked the horror and nightmare of the Second World War for many. Discovered were the remains of 8,000 concentration camp prisoners, and in total, 17 tons of human ashes were found inside of 2 pits. For decades it was known about the Bialuty Forest that it was a place of mass burials of many Polish people who were victims of the German army and the SS during World War II. The country of Poland suffered heavily following the German invasion, and it's estimated that over 5.5 million Polish people were slaughtered by the invading forces, and over 90% of these losses were civilians. Many were rounded up and marched into large pits, where they were then shot and executed by death squads known as the Einsatzgruppe. But the discovery was a poignant reminder that still today the remains of thousands of people lie under the earth, and there are thousands more mass graves which are yet to be found relating to World War II. But what is the story of these 8,000 people whose remains were left inside the forest? Welcome to The Untold Past. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Investigators who worked with the Polish Institute of National Remembrance linked the ashes of at least 8,000 Polish citizens to the concentration camp of Soldau. The 17 tons of ashes were discovered across 2 burial pits, which were both 10 feet deep. As mentioned, it was known for some time that the Bialuty Forest was a resting place of many different Polish victims. Also, the archaeologists found amongst the remains a number of items such as pieces of clothing, buttons, and they discovered nothing of financial value, showing that these people were robbed of their valuables and items before they were killed. A ceremony was held when the grave was discovered, and there were wreaths that were laid, and also a number of speeches made. But the historians made a link between the ashes and the remains of those prisoners from the Soldau concentration camp. This was a camp founded in a former Polish army barracks, and permission to establish a site was given by the Butcher of Prague Reinhard Heydrich. The first prisoners of the camp arrived at the end of September 1939, and some of these were the Polish defenders of the Modlin fortress who were forced to surrender due to a lack of food, ammunition and other supplies. The camp was located near to the town of Dzierżawów, and it was inside land annexed into the Third Reich. Along with the first prisoners of Soldau, there were civilians who were sent there on trucks and also on trains, and they had been evicted from their homes by the Nazis in areas that were subjected to ethnic cleansing. Inside of Soldau, there was harrowing conditions, and it was here where some of the earliest experiments to mass murder using gas were carried out, as victims under the Action T4 programme were sent here, and 1,558 people were murdered in gas vans from May to June 1940. Later, what was learned by the SS at Soldau was applied in the creation of the Chelmno Extermination Centre, where the gas vans were used to slaughter dozens of thousands of people. Inside of the camp, there was no toilet barracks, and prisoners had to relieve themselves only at certain parts of the day, using 2 holes in the ground where boards were placed across. This was in the open too, giving prisoners absolutely no privacy, and the poor sanitation and conditions led to deadly outbreaks of typhus that swept around the camp, and this killed many prisoners, but also a number of German SS guards. The camp was considered a work education centre, and prisoners were sent to different subcamps and smaller areas to complete forced labour. In total, around 30,000 prisoners passed through the barbed wire fences of Soldau, and around 13,000 of them were killed by the conditions and also the brutality of the SS guards. There were 3 subcamps of the site where prisoners worked, and they conducted work from repairing and refitting German tanks used in Operation Barbarossa against the Red Army to completing other hard work. There was no medicine or care given to the prisoners of the site, and food and water was heavily rationed. Specifically inside of the Bialuty Forest, where the grave was found, there were scores of mass killings and executions carried out under the cover of the trees and the dense vegetation. There was a road leading into the forest, which was built by Soldau's inmates, and most days many victims were driven to the forest for their execution. There was inside the forest a small barracks or hut where SS executioners and firing squad members rested and waited, and there were to the right side of the road a total of 5 large pits where executions took place. As more research is conducted into the forests and of Soldau, the estimates of people who were slaughtered and executed in the forest continue to rise. It's estimated that up to 20,000 people were executed there, and amongst them were not just prisoners of the camp, but also Soviet prisoners of war who were captured by the German Wehrmacht. These victims were not recorded on the camp's records, and this was done across other concentration camps too. For example, at Buchenwald, a next shooting facility was established where executioners shot 4,000 Soviet POWs and then disposed of their remains and bodies. It's believed that the bodies of the victims were at first buried inside of large pits within the forest, but then as the war turned against the Germans, a special squad was brought in to clean up the former execution site and to make sure there was less chance of the crimes of the Bialuty Forest ever being discovered. These prisoners dug up the remains of those who were shot, thousands of bodies, and they then cremated them and incinerated the remains to a pile of ashes, which were then buried. The aim of this was to prevent any bodies being found, but then these men who did the morose job were all slaughtered themselves, taking the crimes of the forest to their deaths. Later the camp became a Soviet secret police site, where some native Germans and other supporters of Hitler's Reich were held, and these prisoners were sent out of Poland back to camps inside the Soviet Union. However, the ashes found inside of the forest were clearly one of those mass pits of the remains that had been dealt with by the group of workers under the orders and control of the SS. These were the remains of the prisoners of the camp, and also those who were brought into the forest to be executed by a firing squad or a sole SS executioner inside of a pit. The victims of the site included many members of the Polish elite, members of rival political stances to the Nazis, and also resistance members. All of their remains had been reduced to ashes in an attempt by the SS to cover up the crimes. It was said of this process that the bodies were brought out, burned and pulverised in order to prevent this crime from ever being known, in order to prevent anyone taking responsibility for it. Trees were even then planted over the grave and remains to further conceal what was buried under the soil. As mentioned, it was estimated that these ashes belonged to at least 8,000 victims of the Nazis, and it was said by a researcher that, "We have taken samples from the ashes, which will then be studied in the laboratory, and we will be able to carry out DNA analysis to learn more about the identities of the victims." What was shocking is the pure ruthless operation that was carried out to burn the bodies, and this was to be in a process that took weeks, if not months, to deal with the bodies. But let's spare a thought for those people who did this, as they were also prisoners of a concentration camp, who were forced to do this at gunpoint, under threat of execution and instant death. What is concerning about the grave inside of the Bialuty Forest is that there are probably many more mass graves of victims who were executed within the forest. These were prisoners from Soldau concentration camp, and others who were sent here just for their execution. What truly happened inside the forest between 1940 and 1944 was harrowing, and some of the SS executioners, who were never brought to trial for their crimes, took their actions to their graves with them. There was little punishment for the men who executed thousands inside of the forest, but in the past few years, even 80 years after the end of the Second World War, the stories of many victims of the conflict are being told. But what is also concerning is that the remains of thousands more lie buried under the soil today, all across Poland, with their stories yet to be uncovered. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.